be talking about inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is the rate of increase in prices over a given period of time. Inflation represents how much more expensive the relevant set of goods and services has become over a certain period of time. Alright? So, inflation is basically your increase in the prices over time, a consistent increase in the prices over time. Now, if I say that there is an increase in price of a single item, then that's not called inflation. It has to be for a basket of major goods and services, majority of goods and services. All right. Or if I say that the increase in prices of majority of goods and services, let's say, is for a short period of time, for let's say a week, 15 days or maybe 20 days, that's also not inflation. It's a continuous or a consistent increase in the basket of goods and services over a sustained period of time. All right, so that's inflation. Now let's quickly just see what are the effects of inflation. The first and the foremost effect of inflation is that it erodes your purchasing power. Okay, so what's your purchasing power? What do you understand by purchasing power? I'll explain it with an example. Let's say that one pencil, that you buy one pencil and that one pencil costs you rupees 10. All right. This is at a certain level of inflation, let's say. Now, let's say the price of pencils increases due to inflation in the economy. Okay. So now the same pencil now costs rupees 20. All right. So earlier, if you have just rupees 10, then you can buy only half of that pencil now. Correct? That is, with the same amount of money, you buy less. That's what it means, that inflation erodes your purchasing power. So the quantity of goods or services that you can purchase with the same amount of income goes less. You buy less. Okay, with the same amount of income. So with the same amount of money out here, let's say I have only 10 rupees, that's my income. So earlier I was able to buy that one pencil for 10 rupees. But due to inflation, the cost of pencil has increased to rupees 20, but I still have rupees 10 only. So that's my income. My income is fixed out here, right? So with the same amount of income now, I can buy only half a pencil, for rupees 10. So I am able to buy less with the same amount of income. So that's what it means, that your purchasing power gets eroded. Okay, so that's the first and the foremost effect of inflation on everyone. So inflation erodes the purchasing power. Okay, the second being that if I look at the firms, right? So with inflation, what happens? Now, since there is inflation, so firms are very skeptical to put in their funds in long-term projects. So instead of going for long-term projects, they go for short-term projects. Okay. So not much funds are allocated then for investment purposes. Now that's a blow to the economy, right? So that's another effect of inflation. The third effect of inflation is that when there is inflation, there's a lot of speculation in other areas of economy, right? It could be your real estate, it could be your gold, or it could be, one more thing I had written, it could be your art, expensive art, right? So you could have speculation in these areas. So then lots of the funds, right, will go into these areas because of the speculative gain or loss, whatever you earn. But then for having speculative gains, you invest in these areas rather than investing in plant and equipment, in capital investment. All right. So that's again diversion of resources from productive to non-productive. That's again a blow to the economy. So with inflation, these are your major effects that affect your economy. This is how it affects your economy. Okay, did you get that? All right, I'll just add one more thing. I'll just relate a little macro to it. So, you know that when funds get diverted from your investment, right, to these things, that basically means, I have done that in my previous videos, that there is something that's called aggregate demand in the economy that's given by these four major components, right? So C plus I plus G plus N, net exports. So consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. So when this happens, when the firms are just going for short-term projects, when the money is diverted to real estate, gold, art, for speculation purposes, and not for investment in, capital investment or for plant and machinery, then basically this investment by your firms basically goes down. This goes down means your aggregate demand in the economy goes down, which implies that your GDP in the economy goes down. All right, this is just a connection to your macroeconomics. I have done this aggregate demand thing. I have explained all these factors, the factors affecting these factors, these components in my previous video. So if you want to have a look, you can go. But this is how I just wanted to connect this, So theory connected to the real world. That how your actually inflation affects your firms and the investments, and how that is related to the theory that we have done. All right. Okay. Next, I'll move to, there are different types of inflation. Now, different books have different types of inflation. What I'll just concentrate on two types of inflation. One is called your anticipated inflation. Anticipated inflation. Anticipated inflation is basically the inflation that is expected. So the inflation that you expect, okay, that's your expected inflation. So expected changes in inflation are built into economic decision making. Sorry. So what does it mean? It means that if you are aware of the inflation, if you know that, okay, this much inflation is expected, as I've done with an example. So let's say there is a 5% expected inflation in the economy. Okay, then how will the economy move? How will the economic decisions be taken? Okay, all contracts would build in the expected 5% inflation. Okay. Borrowers and lenders would know and agree that the rupee in which a loan is repaid will be worth less than the rupee given up by the lender when making the loan. And they would exactly know that the rupee would be worth less 5%. Do you understand this? Right? I'll explain this more in this video with an example. But right now, let's just concentrate on what do you understand by expected inflation and how then economic decisions, take that into account. Then the third is nominal interest rates would be raised 5% to compensate for the inflation. So this means that nominal interest rates would be raised 5% to compensate for the inflation. Now, whenever there is inflation, right, in order to keep the real interest rates constant, okay, the nominal interest rates are about raised by the same percentage, right? Okay, I have done this real and nominal, what's the difference and how do you calculate in my previous video of nominal and real GDP. So if you want to have a look, you can. All right. Then you have the long-term labor contracts would increase wages at 5% per year to take account of the inflation. So any kind of contracts, be it your long-term labor contracts, long-term lease contracts, or any type of contracts are there, a contract between a debtor and a lender. So everyone would know that there would be a 5% increase in inflation, right? And they will take that into account, correct? So in order to keep the real wages constant, obviously, if there's a 5% increase in inflation, then the nominal wages would increase by that percentage as well. Okay. So all that will happen if only we know that the expected inflation is this. Okay. There could be, so as such in this type of an economy where the expected inflation is known, right, inflation does not have any real costs. Okay, except the cost that the cost of holding currency rises along with the inflation rate. Why? Because the nominal interest rate increases. Right, as I just explained, that when there is inflation, in order to keep the real interest rate constant, the nominal interest rate also increases. Okay, now when the nominal interest rate increases, what do you understand by the cost of holding currency rise? So let's say I have 100 rupees, there is a 5% inflation, right? I have 100 rupees with me. I have two options: either I keep it with myself or I keep it with a bank. Okay, and I know since there's a 5% inflation, so there would be a rise in nominal interest rate, and I will get a 5% in the bank on this 100 rupees. Okay, so I will get 105 in the bank, let's say. All right, so now if I'm keeping this money with myself when the inflation is there, right, then I am basically foregoing or giving up this extra 5 rupees that I would be getting if I keep this money with the bank. Okay, so that's my cost of holding money. This rupees 5 is my cost of holding money. So as inflation keeps on rising, the cost of holding my money keeps on increasing, because then the bank would be giving me more and more interest on my money. But if I'm keeping it with myself, I would be getting nothing. Do you understand this? Okay. All right. So moving forward, then it's like I'll come to the second type of inflation here, right, which is your unanticipated inflation. So first one was your anticipated inflation, and the second one is your unanticipated inflation. All right, so that's your unanticipated inflation. Now, obviously, unanticipated inflation is the inflation that is not expected. Okay, so the possibility of unanticipated inflation introduces an extra element of risk. Okay, because we don't know how much inflation will be. Such extra risk gives us a cost associated with unanticipated inflation. Okay, now here in anticipated we didn't have much cost except the cost of holding currency increases, but in anticipated we might have one or two costs associated with it, right? The first and the foremost is your redistribution of income and wealth, right? So it's the redistribution of income and wealth that happens when there is unanticipated inflation. Okay, especially the redistribution happens between debtors and creditors. Okay, so it happens between, particularly I'll be talking about these two, right? Debtors and creditors. How there is redistribution of income and wealth among debtors and creditors, and who is hurt and who benefits. Okay, so what happens is that debtors gain from inflation at fixed interest rate because they repay creditors with rupees that are worth less in terms of purchasing power. Okay, I'll repeat that again. Debtors gain from inflation at fixed interest rate. Now that's really important. Fixed interest rates, because they repay creditors with rupees that are worth less in terms of purchasing power. Now what do you mean by this? I'll explain it with the help of an example. So let's say that there is a debtor, okay? So there is a debtor A. He has taken money from creditor B, rupees 100, okay? And this is like today, okay? And then I have 1 year later, okay? Now this 100 rupees was taken at a fixed interest rate, and so at that interest rate the creditor would get back after a year rupees 110, okay? So rupees 110 after an year and rupees 100 today, all right, at a fixed interest rate. Okay, so now let's see that how the creditor is at a loss and debtor is at a gain when there is inflation. How does inflation hurt the creditor and benefit the debtor? Okay, all right. Let's say that I have that my CPI, yeah, right, my consumer price index. So that's the cost of my fixed basket of goods and services. Again, I have explained this term and a lot more in my previous video on nominal and real GDP. Please have a look. So let's say today my CPI, that is my buying of a certain basket of goods and services, is rupees 100. I buy that at 100, right? When there is, let's say, no inflation, after a year, I buy the same goods and services, the basket of goods and services, the same CPI at rupees 100. Okay, so with no inflation, the price remains the same, right? Now, if my debtor A is paying after an year 110 to my creditor B, then what happens? The creditor B is receiving 10 rupees more, right? He or she is receiving 10 rupees more. B is receiving 10 rupees more, and he can buy goods, the same basket of goods and services at only rupees 100. So he gains 10 rupees here. Correct? Okay. Now let's say that there is the same basket of goods and services if today bought is 100, but let's say during 1 year there was an inflation of 2%. Okay, so now the same basket of goods and services would cost 102, correct? So the same basket of goods and services now would be costing 102. So now what happens when my debtor A is paying back creditor B? He or she is giving, A is giving 110, but the same basket of goods B can buy at 102. Okay, same basket of goods, but due to inflation, the prices have gone up. So the same basket of goods can be bought at 102 out here. He's getting 110, but he buys at 102 the same basket of goods. So whatever he's gaining here is 8 rupees, let's say, if I talk in absolute terms, right? Okay, to make it simple. All right. Now let's go and have an extreme case of inflation. So today I have CPI of 100. I buy a certain basket of goods and services at rupees 100. And let's say there's an extreme inflation of 120 this time. Okay, I've taken this extreme case so that you understand it better. So there's an extreme case of 120 inflation this time. So now my CPI, that is my same basket of goods and services, would cost 220 rupees. Okay. So what has happened? Debtor A has given 110 after a year to creditor B. Now creditor B has got 110. I'm repeating it again. This was at a fixed exchange rate, fixed interest rate, right? So the interest rate wasn't changed due to inflation. Okay, so the fixed interest rate, at fixed interest rate, the creditor B was getting 110 rupees back. But now with 110 rupees, the creditor can buy only half of this basket, the same basket of goods and services. So he's at a loss. So the rupees that the debtor is paying to the creditor is now worth less. and so the purchasing power of the creditor goes down. So he can buy the same with the half of that basket only because the prices have shot up to 220. All right. This is how the creditors are hurt with inflation. The value of the rupee that they are getting back is worth less in terms of purchasing power. Okay. On the other hand, the debtor, what he can do or she can do with, he bought this CPI a year back at rupees 100, right? Now he can sell the same basket of goods and services after a year, in this last case at 220, right? Give this creditor B110 back to him at a fixed interest rate and still make a profit of rupees 100. So he's at a profit. So the debtors gain. That's how the debtors gain. All right, because the money that they are paying back to the creditor is now worth less in terms of purchasing power. So in real terms, the debtor is paying much, much less. Okay. All right. Now this is very important to understand. Okay. That's the first, let's say, a cost that's given by unanticipated inflation. Now, another cost that's given by unanticipated inflation is that your net exports fall. Okay, they decrease. How? So when the prices in the economy, domestic economy goes up, then what happens? Our exports become expensive. Okay, so the demand for exports goes down. So our exports goes down. And we start importing more. So imports go more because relatively we would be getting cheaper goods from abroad. So exports goes down and imports increases, and so our net exports goes down. Now if I just connect this with the theory, as in this case, in this AD equation, right, I had C plus I plus G plus NX. So with an unanticipated inflation, my net exports are going down. Net exports are going down, my aggregate demand going down, my GDP of the economy is going down. All right. This is how your unanticipated inflation affects the economy. Okay. The cost associated with unanticipated inflation. However, unanticipated inflation has some benefits also. Okay, and the agent that is actually most beneficial with the unanticipated inflation is the government. Can you tell me why? Because government is a very, very large debtor. And I just explained that how debtors benefit from inflation. So government is actually a very beneficial agent when there is inflation in the economy. Okay. And the second is that for the government. So government gains when there is inflation in terms of tax revenue. Okay. Why? Because the nominal income also increases when there is inflation. I just explained a few minutes back that when there is inflation, in order to keep real income constant, there is rise in wages, right? So the nominal income of the people increases. Now, when the nominal income increases, they move to higher brackets of taxes. So the tax revenue for the government increases when there is inflation. All right. So we see that inflation has some costs, it has some benefits as well, and time tell us that how inflation is overall beneficial for the economy or not beneficial for the economy. Okay. Have a good day. Bye bye.